cut into my time a little, I'm totally okay with that. I'm printing stuff off last minute, so knock yourself out.
Well, I think I've got, I think I've gotten through all the questions here.
So is it me? Am I up?
You are up.
All right. So perfect. Okay, I hope my sound quality is good. It's been a little iffy through all of this, so I apologize if I sound tinny. Oh crap, sorry, I hit something on my printer and now it's doing things. I was trying to turn it off to make it quiet and that opposite happened. So anyway, I have a new book coming out, hopefully at the end of this summer, fingers crossed, if I can get myself together to get this going. And so I was going to share bits and pieces of that with you today. I thought it would be better to do it a few scene by scene rather than just the first couple of chapters, because, or a chapter in its whole, because I think it won't really make a lot of sense by itself. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you want to hear something specific, I'm also happy to oblige. Just let me know. And adjust that a little bit. So this book, just to give you an idea, has firstly been in the works, God, for a really long time. Probably a little over 2 years. So basically, I started it shortly after I finished On Equal Ground. Then I got sidetracked with Life and the 26th of November. Then I got sidetracked with more Life. And then 2019 was kind of, I called it like the worst year of my adult life or whole life. Let's just go with that. But it wasn't so much worse as just stressful, very involved and very expensive. So it was a huge remodel of our house, which was fun, but stressful and expensive. And then my daughter had an accident of bicycle versus truck won. That was a very scary situation, and she had to have surgery, and she still has to have a follow-up surgery this summer. And then the week the remodel finished, she had her accident. Then the week she got her cast off, we left for a 2-month trip in Europe, which again was fun, but also stressful, involved, and very expensive. And it kind of like everything went wrong on that trip by the end of the first week. Lost reservations, missed flights, so much craziness on that trip. It was ridiculous. So, and then we got back, and the week we got back, my husband got offered the job here. Most of you know I just did a big move. So I was in Nashville. Now I'm in Baltimore. He was in Baltimore for 6 months while I was doing it solo with the kids, getting the house on the market. So it's just been crazy. So sorry about all of that and that I didn't get anything out, and whatever, here we are. So I'm finally attempting to get back in the game and finish this so you guys can help prod me along. But anyway, so the book I'm working on now is called Sons of Pemberley. And it's really Darcy family centric, very Pemberley centric, hence the title. And it is kind of a family saga. Someone asked me to describe this book, and I had a really hard time actually describing it because there are so many characters. Many of them are original. We do spend a lot of time with our familiar characters, but you'll see a lot more backstory on who they are and how they become that way. And it's very Bennett light and very Darcy heavy in terms of the whole Darcy family. So it actually begins, the prologue is summer of 1769, and we're meeting Samuel Wickham, George Wickham's father, and George Darcy, our Fitzwilliam Darcy's father, as children. And it's just one little prologue, but it sets up their relationship for the whole book. So I thought I'd start with that. And this is just going to be a series of small scenes. So anyway, first one up, prologue. Lambton, Derbyshire, summer of 1769. Samuel Wickham walked through the woods with his fishing pole over one shoulder and a string of fish over the other. His mother would be pleased with his catch. He could almost hear the grease crackling in the pan on the old stove. He was lost enough in his imaginings that he didn't hear the footsteps running towards him until he was nearly bowled over by a little boy smaller than himself. "Oi, watch yourself," cried Samuel. "Pardon," cried the boy, "I must fetch help." The boy took off running again, and Samuel called after him, asking what the problem was. The smaller boy yelled over his shoulder, "My cousin, at the pond." Wickham's eyes grew wide. He dropped his pole and fish and sprinted in the direction the boy had run from. The dark pond was a quarter-mile away, just on the boundary of Pemberley and another small farm. Samuel could run like a deer, and he was at the pond's edge before he lost his breath. He scanned the surface of the water, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Then, so suddenly it made his breath catch, a pale hand shot up out of the water, followed by a gasping mouth that quickly sunk back into the pond. Samuel shucked off his shoes and pulled his shirt over his head before diving in. The water was murky and filled with reeds and other plants. He could hardly see an arm's length in front of him. He swam toward where he thought he had seen the flailing arm, but he had to resurface for air and find his bearings. Finally, he saw what looked like an opaque wall where he knew the center of the pond to be. He hoped the cloudiness of the water was caused by someone attempting to swim free and pushed down his fear of creatures lurking on the muddy floor. He felt his way through the cloud and soon came into contact with flesh. He grabbed an arm and pulled the limp body toward him. Soon he had reached the surface and swam as fast as he could to the ledge. He laid the small body on its side and pounded the boy's back as he had seen his father do. He said a prayer, then another, and continued to hit the boy high on his back as he balanced him on his side, water trickling from his mouth. Finally, when Samuel had all but given up, the boy coughed and spluttered and spat up the pond water. He fell onto his stomach, continuing to spit and hack, and pushed himself up on his elbows. "Are you well?" asked Samuel. The boy turned his head and looked at him with dazed eyes. "Can you speak?" The boy continued to stare at him, and Samuel began to worry. "Your cousin has gone to fetch help. Someone should be along soon." "My cousin?" Samuel sighed in relief. "You can talk." "Of course I can talk," said the boy, looking mildly insulted. "Well, you cannot swim. It didn't seem much of a stretch to think you couldn't talk either." The boy looked at him in shock. His mouth dropped nearly to his chest. After a minute of silence, his shoulders began to shake, and he laughed breathily, interspersed with coughing, until he was shaking and guffawing loudly. Samuel Wickham joined him and shook his head until the other boy quieted. "George Darcy of Pemberley," said the boy with a hand outstretched. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Samuel Wickham of Lambton, pleased to meet you." So that's how our guys meet, and it sort of sets up their lifelong friendship. Basically, Wickham keeps getting Darcy out of trouble. And so the senior Wickham, I really like. I started this story based on the idea that Lady Anne Darcy didn't die young or didn't die right after Georgiana was born. The thing about the Darcys is we just don't know very much about them. As was mentioned in earlier chats, we just see everything in Pride and Prejudice primarily from Elizabeth Bennet's point of view. So we have no idea what the Darcy family was like. We don't know why Lady Anne Darcy died. We know that Darcy says his father was especially an excellent man, but he does say both his parents were good. We know his father really loved and trusted, or not loved, but esteemed, admired his steward enough to take on the care of his son, which anybody who's had, the care of a child knows is no small thing. So I knew there had to be some kind of strong relationship between them, and I wanted to explore that and see why that happened and what that looked like and how it would progress throughout their lives, essentially. So that's kind of where that started. And I have several scenes I want to read you, but I thought I would do something a little bit out of order because there's this one scene that is the one that I wrote first, oddly enough, and it happens way, way, way later in the book. And the book hops timelines a lot. So I'm still organizing that, and I'm going to do something today I have never done before, like ever. I don't ever share works in progress. It's not something I do. I have like 4 manuscripts on my computer right now, which we might get lucky and they'll all be, done close to each other. But I just don't share things until they're at least really, really close to being finished. But I thought it might be fun, since we're all kind of in this weird phase together, I thought it might be fun to get some advice. So if I'm not saying I'm going to take it, but if you have some thoughts or ideas of something you'd like to see, kind of like we were talking about in tropes last night, what people love and want to see more of, I'm curious, what would you like to see that you haven't already seen? Because I'm enough still in the writing of this that I could add a few things if I wanted to. So this is actually the very first scene that I wrote for this book. It happens much further down in terms of the story's timeline, but this will give you an idea of kind of the flavor of the whole thing. So Lady Anne sat behind the desk with her back ramrod straight and her face in a frozen mask of inscrutability. "Please be seated, Mr. Wickham." He sat in front of her with a charming smile. "Lady Anne, I was so touched to be remembered in Mr. Darcy's will. You know not how I esteemed him. She interrupted him. Enough, Mr. Wickham. Your flattery may have worked on my husband, but it will not work with me. The secretary has your bank draft, a legacy of £500. See you use it wisely. I would hate for my husband's generosity to be misplaced. Thank you, Lady Anne. I will. She cut him off again. Of course, I do not expect to see you again at Pemberley. Your father may do with his own home as he wishes, but this is my house, and after today, I do not want to see you in it. The same goes for the grounds. When on Pemberley property, you may restrict yourself to your father's home, or come here not at all. Is that clear? She said in a no-nonsense voice. Perfectly clear, madam. He stood and bowed slightly. She spoke again just as he was nearing the door. Mr. Wickham? He turned and faced her with an expectant look. He never did learn. I expect you to stay clear of my children as well, including Fitzwilliam. If I hear otherwise, I will know how to act. Yes, Lady Anne. He bowed again, his expression caught between a grimace and a smile, and walked out the door. Well, there's that taken care of. She brushed her hands together and stood behind her husband's desk, removing the cushion from the chair she had been sitting on to make her appear taller. That, Mr. Darcy, is how you deal with the steward's son. She nodded at the painting of herself and her husband hanging on the opposite wall and left the room, her head held high. So that was the first thing that, oh, thank you. That was the first thing that I started with. And I just thought, if Lady Anne lives, doesn't that change everything? Like, surely it changes everything. So I kind of leapt off the cliff of this. I actually titled this story for myself and on my computer, Long Live Lady Anne, because she was just this really formidable character. I basically wanted her to be a more lovable Lady Catherine, like the formidableness, is that a word? Formidableness of that, you know, daughter of the Earl Fitzwilliam scion kind of thing, with that sense of gravitas, but at the same time, kind and somebody that a man like George Darcy would actually love. So yeah, it's been an interesting experiment and I kind of love her. So anyway, so here we go, moving on. These ones I printed, so this will be a lot easier to do than bring from the computer. But so basically what has happened now is Lady Anne lives. The reason there's such a big gap between, and I'm only spoiling this for you because it happens early in the book and I figure you can figure it out on your own anyway. So the gap between Fitzwilliam and Georgiana is a few young deaths, sadly, and a stillbirth, etc. So it's not because they don't like each other or because Lady Anne just can't have children for whatever reason. There's legit issues going on there. And so if she lives, she goes on to have more kids. So we have Fitzwilliam, then 12 years later, there's Georgiana. Then he has two younger brothers, Nathaniel, who is 14 in this story, and Luke, who is 12, who we're going to meet in a minute. So anyway, starting with a season in London, and I kind of have that assembly room scene where Darcy is standing about in his stupid manner and needs to dance, but instead of Bingley giving him a hard time, it's his mother. And he can't say no to his mother. So she makes him get out there and do the right thing. So I like that. I like that she's not afraid to take him to task because, you know, he may be a gentleman's son, but she's an earl's daughter and he better not forget it. So I like that about her, that she can take the big guy to task. But anyway, so the third week of June, the Darcy family left London and made their way to Margate. Darcy, his closest friend, Mr. Bingley, and his brothers Nathaniel and Luke rode alongside the carriage. Lady Anne Darcy, her daughter Georgiana, Mrs. Darcy's cousin, Lady Julia Dryden, the Countess of Livingston, and her daughter, Lady Marianne Pickering, rode inside. Oh, I'm going to pause for a second and tell you, Lady Marianne is technically second cousins to Fitzwilliam, but their mothers are first cousins, and they were raised kind of more like sisters because their mothers, who had been sisters, were very, very close. They're only a year apart. They had a double wedding. They did the whole deal. So we have these two really close sisters who have these two daughters who grow up to be very good friends, who have daughters who grow up to be. So it's just this connected family. So Darcy and Marianne are like 6 months apart. And so she is kind of like his sister. So anybody who's worried that Marianne and Darcy have a romantic thing, they don't. Stop thinking like that. They're not like that. They have a very sibling-esque relationship, just FYI. Okay, and I love Marianne's character, so I'm going to show you her a little bit more in a minute. So Lady Julia and Lady Anne's mothers had been sisters. Anne and Julia had grown up together, gone to school together, come out together, and married within a month of each other. Their friendship was a steady one, and they spent much time together over the years. Lady Julia's eldest daughter, Mary Ann, born a month after her cousin Fitzwilliam, was expecting her third child and spending the summer with her mother and aunt. Her sons were with her husband's parents in Shropshire at their insistence, while her husband himself was on the peninsula. He was a colonel in the Light Division. She would have followed the drum as she had done in previous summers, but her pregnancy kept her in England until the babe was safely delivered. Lady Mary Ann could have done better than a colonel. With her dowry and connections, she could have gotten a first son and heir, or so her mother lamented. But she would have the colonel and none other, and his father was an earl, so her parents could not object too much. Privately, Mary Ann thought herself too plain to bring a high price on the marriage mart, but she would not point this out herself if others were disinclined to notice it. Her youngest sister was engaged to the heir of a marquis. That would have to satisfy her mother's plans for matrimonial greatness. They arrived in Margate with little hassle and made themselves at home in the rambling house. Lady Anne had been born of Fitzwilliam. Her mother and Lady Julia's mother had been born Digby's, of the Somerset Digbys. This house was owned by her maternal uncle, Sir Colin Digby, and Lady Anne smiled to see the family crest framed simply in the vestibule. "Where do you want me, Lady Anne?" asked Mary Ann in her straightforward manner. Anne smiled. Mary Ann spoke as plainly as she dressed, yet she could not help but find it refreshing. "Let us see if Mildred has ruined anything with her redecorating," she answered as she led the way up the stairs. Mildred Digby was her cousin's wife, who, with Colin Digby's declining health and increasing years, had begun redecorating his homes as if they were already hers. It was terribly indelicate, and Anne felt no shame in despising her for it. Her uncle Digby was greatly loved and valued by his family, and she found anyone who wished his death a moment earlier than God ordained it to be unworthy of her time and heartless in the extreme. "Let's put you here," she said to Mary Ann. They entered a breezy room with large windows facing the sea. "If Fitzwilliam says anything about you getting the best room, tell him pregnancy earns you precedence. And then send him to me." Mary Ann returned her mischievous smile and began to settle in. Her mother's maid bustled in shortly to help her unpack. Mary Ann refused to keep her own maid. It was impossible to have one always with her on campaign. One of the lower soldiers' wives was usually happy for the little work she gave them, and when she was with her family or her husband's, there was always someone who would do to help her with what she couldn't manage herself. She would much rather save the expense, and herself the trouble of elaborate hairstyles and ridiculous gowns. The women in her family were horrified by this, naturally. Lady Anne settled everyone into their rooms, Nathaniel and Luke sharing a chamber at the back of the house, and Fitzwilliam and Charles Bingley in linked rooms far from the ladies. Lady Anne rather liked Charles Bingley. He was not who she would have originally chosen as a close friend for her son, but he was a significant improvement over George Wickham, whom she thought was not worth the breath one wasted in talking of him. Bingley's fortune had come from trade, but she was not so blinded by prejudice that she could not see how kind he was, and how genuine his affection for her son. His father had educated him as a gentleman, and he was looking to purchase an estate of his own. All of this would, of course, make him more acceptable to her circles, and she would do what she could for the boy. It was rare to find someone so pure of heart, utterly bereft of malice. His situation was not ideal, but his character was exactly what her son needed in a friend, and she could admit to being a little beguiled by him herself. He reminded her of her husband and of her son Luke, so cheerful and unguarded. Fitzwilliam was more like herself, reserved, thoughtful, preferring intelligent discussions and debates to light conversations on inconsequential topics. She and George Darcy had been good for each other that way. She had grounded him when he became too carried away by his own joie de vivre. He had lifted her out of what could have become a depressing well of silence and introspection. She hoped Mr. Bingley would be as enlightening an influence on her son as her husband had been on her. So that kind of introduces the general thing. So at this point, someone's asking how old Fitzwilliam Darcy is at this point. This is the summer before canon. So in canon, when Georgiana would go to Ramsgate with a companion, why would she need a companion? Because we have Lady Anne living forever. So there is no companion, there is no Ramsgate. Instead, they go to the family place in Margate. And I dare somebody to try to mess with her cousin while Mary Anne's around, because she is fierce and she's going to have a lot of fun with Miss Bingley in a little bit. But anyways, so he, I suppose at this point, would be 27. And, oh, well, okay, Jenna, asking, why hasn't Lady Anne directed Fitzwilliam Darcy to or whom to marry? And we're about to get to that. So Lady Anne and Darcy are very similar in temperament. So while they're at this beach vacation. They're gonna sit on the water and have a little heart-to-heart. So this is that scene. Care to share your thoughts, Fitzwilliam? Asked Lady Anne quietly as she sat next to her eldest son on the beach. He looked out across the water, watching his brothers and Bingley chase a crab along the surf. They darted in and out of the waves, laughing and calling to each other in excitement. Sometimes I think Bingley is more like Nathaniel and Luke than I am, he said thoughtfully. They are full young. You were not so very different when you were their age. You simply do not remember it as such. And you have a great many responsibilities thrust on you when you were very young. He turned to face her, and she brushed the hair off his forehead tenderly. He smiled gently at the gesture, and she looked at him with soft eyes. You are more like me, son, reserved, calm, as likely to observe as to participate. It is no less estimable than one who is lively. I dare say your quiet nature will serve you well in the years to come. It has certainly kept you out of trouble thus far. They shared a rueful smile as she continued. Your brothers are more like your father, careening wildly through life, looking for something to anchor them, though they do not know it yet. I was that anchor for your father, and I perform a similar office for your brothers, alongside yourself. All too soon, they will grow up and marry shy, blushing ladies who I can only hope will be the steadfast companions they need. They watched the young Darcys running on the beach quietly for a few minutes. I do not think you would suit a quiet woman, Lady Anne finally said. Darcy turned to her in surprise. Oh? Just as I needed your father's joy in life, his optimism. You need a woman who can make you laugh, who will not allow you to remain silent for 3 days together. She nudged him gently with her shoulder, and he shook his head, his hair falling over his brow again and ruffling in the breeze as they continued to watch the waves roll in, falling into silence as they so often did. It is a mother's prerogative to see her children well married. I know you have been considering it of late. His head snapped toward her with wide eyes, and she looked at him knowingly. He finally hung his head in recognition of his mother's understanding. I do not. He tried to speak, but could not form the words he wanted to say. I am sorry I pushed you, she said. He looked at her in surprise again, wondering if this was a day for astonishment. She gave him a guilty smile. You are my eldest son, the heir, my firstborn. You have a special place in my heart, Fitzwilliam, more than you will ever know. She looked at him with watery eyes, and he nodded, leaning over to kiss her cheek softly. He knew of what she spoke. He remembered long afternoons spent reading with her on her bed when she was too ill to rise. He had seen the tiny graves in the churchyard. I know, Mother, we are of a kind, you and I. They sat quietly for some minutes before Fitzwilliam spoke hesitantly. I should like to marry a good woman, one I hold in affection. He squinted into the waning sunlight and whispered, I should like to be happy. Lady Anne rested her head on her son's strong shoulder and watched her children frolicking, a soft sigh escaping her. Very well, I will leave you be. Thank you. Promise me something. Do not leave it forever. I would like to see grandchildren while I am still young enough to hold them. Very well, Mother. So she has been doing a little matchmaking. I just didn't show you everything. But anyway, so yeah, so they do a little bit of that, and it's fun. So basically they go to the beach, they have a family vacation, it's all fun. And then Bingley, being Bingley, wants to return the hospitality. So guess who goes to Netherfield? So it's everybody all together, crazy party. So his younger brother Luke sort of develops a crush on everybody's favorite Elizabeth, and this gets interesting. So anyway, this is the last scene I'll read you. I've just got a couple minutes, so I'll go through this. So now the whole family's in Hertfordshire. Caroline's hosting everybody, but Lady Marianne is not there because she's off having a baby in London. But it's Darcy, his mom, and his sister and brother. Luke smiled when he spied a bonnet moving through the woods ahead. He spurred his horse onto the boundary between Netherfield and Longbourn and slowed as he approached her. Good morning, Miss Bennet, cried Luke. Elizabeth turned toward him in surprise and smiled brightly. Good morning, Master Darcy. Enjoying a morning ride, or are you headed somewhere? He dismounted and bowed neatly, then said, I was just enjoying the autumn weather. May I walk with you? Of course. She smiled and waited for him to tie his horse to a tree. He held out his arm and she took it, thinking it an adorable gesture and hiding her smile. Without his hat, he was a little shorter than her, and with it, he just passed her. He stood with his back stiff and straight to make himself appear taller. Are you enjoying your stay in Hertfordshire? She asked. Yes, it is a very pleasant country. much different from Derbyshire and Kent. I wouldn't know. I have never been to either, but I shall trust your word. You have never been to Kent? He asked, surprised. Not to visit the seaside? Sadly, no. I have never been there, though I have heard it is lovely. I have seen the Channel, though. The year I turned 15, I accompanied my aunt and uncle on a trip to Essex. My elder sister Jane was supposed to go, but she became ill just before it was time to depart, and I went in her place. I have never been to Essex, he said. Is it like Hertfordshire? She described the landscape and the towns they had visited, and he listened with rapt attention, laughing in all the right places and asking intelligent questions that proved how sharp his mind was and how thorough his education had already been. How odd that my favorite companion of late should be a 12-year-old boy, she thought. Tell me about Derbyshire, she said as they walked along a stream, both enjoying the other's company so much they were oblivious to the time. Oh, Derbyshire is the most beautiful place in England, he cried. It is much different from Hertfordshire, more hills and rocks, but just as green. He went on to describe the streams and lakes and forests, the caves he had explored with his brother, and the sheep that dotted the landscape. Are you looking forward to Eton next year? She asked after the subject of Derbyshire had been exhausted. Not particularly. I shall miss home and mother and Georgiana, and Fitzwilliam, of course, though he is not often there. But it will be good to be with Nathaniel. He is 2 years your senior. Yes, nearly 3, really. This is his 2nd year at Eton. Georgiana misses him dreadfully. I can imagine. If I had such fine brothers, I would never wish them to leave me, she said sweetly. He smiled beatifically at her, and she reminded herself not to encourage him too much. It wouldn't do to hurt the dear boy. Georgiana often wishes for a sister, but mother says she should be satisfied with keeping her gowns to herself and having 3 brothers to protect her. Elizabeth laughed and said, Your mother is correct. Sisters can be wonderful, but they also steal your ribbons, make over your bonnets without your permission, and make a dreadful amount of noise before a ball. He laughed and was about to say something when a loud voice interrupted them. Luke, come, you're wanted inside. Elizabeth looked up and saw Mr. Darcy astride a great gray beast, glaring at them from his high perch. Luke pulled himself up high and drew her a little closer. In a moment, brother, I must bid good day to Miss Bennet. He released Elizabeth's arm and bowed smartly before her, thanked her for a lovely walk, and ensured she would make her way home safely on her own. She informed him that since they had traveled back to where they had begun, nodding to his horse tied a few yards away, she would be perfectly well. She curtsied, thanked him for the walk, and told him she had had a very pleasant time. She gave a curt nod to the elder Mr. Darcy and turned to go. Fitzwilliam, Luke hissed once they were some distance from the woods where they had left Miss Bennet, must you embarrass me so? Darcy looked at him in bemusement. I apologize if I did. It was not my intention. Mother has been looking for you above half an hour. Miss Bennet should know better than to drag you off on one of her walks without informing anyone. Luke huffed. She did not drag me anywhere. I approached her on her morning walk. We were having a perfectly lovely time until you came along and spoiled it. He looked straight ahead, his lips pursed in annoyance and his eyes hard. Darcy stared at him in surprise, then straightened and said formally, Forgive me, I didn't mean to spoil your morning or embarrass you in front of your friend. Luke thanked him curtly, still refusing to look at him, and took off toward the house at a canter. Darcy watched him go, a suspicion forming in the back of his mind. And that's all, folks. We're officially out of time. And thank you, Joanna. I thought that was adorable too. I like Luke. He's a really fun character to write. And I think he makes a great foil to Darcy, like an actual younger brother. And I thought how if he did have real younger brothers, how would that change his relationship with Bingley, who was kind of filling the younger brother office. So it's kind of been ridiculously fun. But I think we're fresh out of time. So I can take like a one question if you've got a question. And then I think it's time to turn over to the next person. So I think it's Victoria, right? Victoria, are you next? I had my schedule and I've lost it in my pile of
Yes,
stories.
it's Victoria. And there's a question from Victoria too. What's the title?
Sons of Pemberley. All of them.
Beautiful.
Great title. And thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
A marvelous reading. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
Elizabeth, please take some questions. I've got a lot of time and I don't know how I'm going to fill it.
Okay. So I see somebody has said, yeah, it will, Jenna, it will be a long book. I've been calling it The Beast because there are so many characters and subplots and there's a lot going on. And it's a lot of time hopping between like 1811 and then going back to 1769 and then back to 1811 and then back to 1806 and then it's all over. And we kind of canvas the older Darcy's almost their entire marriage and Fitzwilliam's childhood. So yeah, it's long, but sorry. And the title, one more time, is Sons of Pemberley. Sons of Pemberley, and it will be out hopefully at the end of the summer. So as far as advice for me, I'm curious like what people want to see more of, because I think we all kind of get bored with the same thing. So I had done some things where I had compacted the story, for lack of a better term. So like I would have told 2 or 3 years worth of stuff in 2 or 3 paragraphs and just said, this is what happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here are some feelings about it at the end. But then those could very, very easily be expanded. And I'm wondering, am I the only person who's interested in seeing George and Lady Anne's marriage, or other people interested in that too? Like, I'm just curious what you guys would like to see more of. Okay, I don't understand. Any Easter eggs with Mrs. Garter's family in Lambton? Do you mean like breadcrumbs? So that's Nicole's question. I don't understand. Nicole, tell me what you're talking about. Good. Oh, I like that. You do want to see it. That's great. Yeah. Oh, and Lady Anne and Caroline. So Lady Anne is going to, with Caroline, do a little bit of a mix of taking her under her wing, but in a really like bitchy way, because I thought you would appreciate that, Joanna. So, because no, at this point there are. I see Nicole's answering. So yeah, Easter eggs or breadcrumbs. No, I don't at this point have mentions of the Gardner family, though I guess I could. Actually, you know what? There's a subplot that's not mentioned in today's reading of Wickham's wife, who's so horrible, just like the worst person in the world. And so she could know the Gardners. So that I might, you know what? Thank you, Nicole. That's going in. That's going in. So yeah, she's a horrible cow. We don't like her. This is probably the first story I've written with an actual proper villain who sits around like manipulating and doing horrible things. So what I've done with Caroline, because I have this other evil person, is that Caroline's just a snob. She's not evil. She's just self-absorbed and thinks she's better than she is. So Lady Anne is kind of begrudgingly teaching her, mostly because she likes Bingley. So she wants to do something nice for Bingley, but also selfishly because she has to see her. So she's like, well, if I'm going to have to be around this cow, I should at least make her passable company. So gives her like clothing advice and stuff like that. And she's doing all this stuff with Caroline where she's really masterful in a way that I am not, but aspire to be. Like Lady Anne is like my spirit animal. Like I want to be like her when I grow up. So she's very like, she insults Caroline's clothes in the nicest way by telling her, you know, like you have such delicate features. You shouldn't wear things that overpower you, you know, make sure the dress isn't wearing you and you're wearing the dress and all this stuff. So lots of fashion advice, lots of little stuff here or there. But so it's not a proper set down so much as just like little individual jellyfish stings until she's like subdued. Until we've neutralized the threat.
Elizabeth on YouTube, Kim Bell wants to know, does Lady Anne guide Bingley to Jane because she's so quiet?
No, she does not. So Lady Anne is a very interesting character. She is at the heart of herself still very much a snob. She's the daughter of an earl, what we would think of as a snob, but she doesn't think she's a snob because she thinks this is appropriate according to rank. And so her husband's very close friendship with this steward, basically his entire life, really rankles her. And especially her husband, like taking care of young Wickham, really, really sticks in her craw. Like she does not like it. But after he saves her husband's life, like again and again and again, and he keeps being there for him and being this. And at one point, like Darcy's like, so you've saved my life again. And Wickham's like, well, I would quit if you would stop getting into so much trouble. But she's eventually won over, but it's kind of a grudging thing. But she very much hates Mrs. Wickham. And ironically, it's her hatred of Mrs. Wickham that creates sympathy for Mr. Wickham, which sort of softens her class consciousness. So she does like the Bennets. She thinks they're nice, but she does not think they're appropriate for her boys. So there's a bit of a internal struggle happening with that. Yeah. Is the evil person an original character? Yes, she's an original character, and you will love to hate her. She's beautiful and psycho. So completely crazy. So, and does Wickham end up in Meryton? Actually, okay, answer me this. Do we or do we not want to redeem Wickham? Because guys, I'm going back and forth on this. I can't decide if I want him to just, this is why I say never talk about books when they're this undeveloped. Because I can't decide what to do with him. On the one hand, I have sympathy for him because his mother is just vile. But on the other hand, he's Wickham and we hate him. So I don't know. Oh, he does not run off with Lydia. That does not happen. I'm sorry. I'm just over it. I'm so over that storyline. Can we just pretend it's not happening? So yeah, I'm actually going to have Lady Anne have a bit of a positive influence on the Bennets, mostly because Mrs. Bennet will be so in awe of her that she's going to try to imitate her in such a way that it will be quite comical. She'll imitate her feathery headdress, but Lady Anne is very tall and willowy, and she compares herself to a heron. But I have to find out, Joanna, you can tell me, do you have herons in England?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
okay, great. Somebody always is you can't use that bird. They don't have that bird in England. So Lady Anne is quite different in the way she looks from Mrs. Bennet. So when Mrs. Bennet tries to copy her, it's very funny. But anyway, there will be a little bit of a positive influence there. And seeing Georgiana is not out, even though she's a little bit older, almost a full year older than Lydia, will kind of affect their thought process. Not hugely drastic, but enough. Okay, so someone wants Wickham to just be gone rather than taking the time to reform him. I've seriously considered this. Just bye, Felicia. We don't need you. Just go. Just get out of here. But at the same time, I feel we see him so much as a kid. We see him hanging out with Darcy. We see him with Colonel Fitzwilliam, who I think I have to call Richard because I tried to call him something else and everything in me revolted. I just couldn't do it. So I feel sorry for that kid. I feel sorry. I feel there are very few actually evil children. I've met one that I'm pretty sure is a sociopath. But otherwise, children are mostly really nice, naturally, and then they become horrible based on life experiences. So, okay, can I totally give you a major spoiler and then you'll understand everything, but don't tell anybody else. So what happens basically is I swap Lady Anne and Mrs. Wickham. So in the way Lady Anne was supposed to die, I instead kill off Mrs. Wickham. So if she dies earlier in George's life, how does that change George? So there's a little bit of that, but I don't think he becomes that much better because of all the, yeah, I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I just had a crazy notion that you have the elder Mr. Wickham saving Mr. Darcy so many times, you could have Darcy have to save Wickham. And it literally has the question, do I want to save him?
That's actually a really great idea.
And that would change Wickham.
Yeah, and it just, there is this, I was debating whether or not I would read it today, right after he has that scene with Lady Anne, where he walks out and she's basically kicked him off of Pemberley. He bumps into Fitzwilliam in the hallway and they have some words, and Darcy says, your father is a good man and he is in you somewhere. You could be more than what you are. And Wickham has this horrible torture feeling, and he just doesn't know what to do with himself. He's very much a man at war with his own nature. So I feel now I have to redeem him. Dang it. But anyway, I can go on and on and on about, Jenna wants to know if she's going to get co-credit for writing. You know what, Jenna? I will list you in the acknowledgements especially if you send me a message roughly once a week to say, get your ass in gear and finish your book. I would appreciate that. But anyway, I don't want to suck up Victoria's time because I can talk all day about books. So I'm going to stop now and turn it over to you. But thank you so much for listening, everybody. I had a great time with you guys.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.